Hours spent looking at a screen, manipulating a virtual world with your fingers and thumbs. Good or bad for you? Does it change your mind, perhaps for better or for worse? Gaming, what does it do to us? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. The parents who raised a virtual child and let their own starve to death in South Korea. A teenager in the US who killed his parents because he didn't think they would be dead forever. Just two terrible events that some have blamed on gaming addiction. But does such a thing even exist?
It can offer endless hours of adventure, with captivating storylines and exciting characters in immersive virtual worlds. Across the world, gamers spend 3 billion hours a week playing. 9% are considered gaming addicts. This year, gaming addiction will be listed as a mental health disorder by the World Health Organization. Are gamers becoming victims? And should those who play video games be worried? In the United States, 5 million people spend more than 40 hours a week playing video games, the equivalent of a full-time job. And in some Asian countries, it is already considered a public health problem. Many countries have private addiction clinics and boot camps to treat addicts.
I'm sometimes tempted to play games, but very quickly I realized that that is not an option for me, because I realized that once I start, I don't know when I'm going to stop.
And according to one study, addiction to video games can contribute to anxiety, low self-esteem, and depression, affecting gamers both psychologically and physically. But if played in moderation, can games be beneficial? Studies have shown that action games can improve attention to detail. And one study suggests that video games can help children with dyslexia. Brain-teasing games have been shown to slow the process of brain aging for up to 7 years. And there are even benefits to video games in medicine. Young doctors with previous exposure to video games have shown fewer errors and faster completion in surgery. And video game champions can earn thousands of dollars competing.
Я бы назвал это не привязанностью, я назвал бы это любовью. То есть ты просыпаешься, это не такое, не как тяга, не тяга. Это не как обыденное, то, что ты просыпаешься, тебе приходится играть. А наоборот, именно любовь, чтобы потренироваться, чтобы улучшить себя и улучшить себя.
The benefits of gaming go well beyond entertainment. But at what point does a game become a problem? As we kill time glued to our screens, are we winning or losing?
Very pleased to say that joining us via Skype we have in Boston Peter Gray, Professor of Psychology at Boston College. With me at the round table we have Matthew Rees, an addiction therapist. We have Tom Scott, a gaming community ambassador who organises and competes in national and international gaming competitions, and Noel Bell, a clinical psychotherapist. Thank you all very much indeed for coming on. Peter Gray, let me come to you first of all. I outlined two cases that have made headlines there. The family that raised a virtual child, their own child died, and the teenager who shot his parents because he thought they might come back to life. Something is wrong here, isn't there?
The media love these kinds of stories. This really grabs attention, right? And it's not surprising. You know, there are hundreds of millions of people throughout the world who play video games, okay? So it wouldn't be surprising if some number of that hundreds of millions are psychotic or severely depressed or murderous or and so on and so forth. So of course you can find such cases. But there are also hundreds of millions of people who don't play video games, some of whom are psychotic, some of whom commit murder, and so on and so forth. So the case stories tell us absolutely nothing about the effects of video games. What you've got to do is serious science if you want to know. You've got to look statistically, you've got to do studies, compare kids who play video games with those who don't overall. do studies looking at the relationship between the amount of time spent playing video games and various aspects of their mental health and so on and so forth. And because I am regularly asked by parents who are terrified about video games, some of them, I mean, look at the headlines you see. Here's something that came out in the New York Post about a year and a half ago. The headline screams out, "It's digital heroin. How screens turn kids into psychotic junkies." And of course, it's based on a case story. And then it goes
Yeah.
on and on with this scary information. And then parents are terrified.
Peter, can I come back to you to get examples of where you think it's beneficial in just a moment, but open up the discussion to our two health professionals that we have at the table before we come to you, Tom, and talk about what you think the benefits are. I understand what Peter's saying when he says, you get murderers, you get lunatics in all walks of life. It doesn't necessarily come because they play video games. But you have concerns. Who wants to start on this one?
Yeah, and I think, irrespective of whether the World Health Organization, defined what a gaming disorder is, and way before that.
And they've said now that they believe there is a gaming disorder.
Yeah, they've made an attempt to define what a gaming disorder is. But we have people coming through our door at our treatment centres where gaming has become a real problem for them and for the people around them. They've displayed a lack of ability to control the amount of time they're gaming. It's had a social impact in terms of how they interact with their family and friends. In some cases, it's had a physical impact where their diet has deteriorated and their self-care has deteriorated. And it's had an impact in either their work or educational life.
But that's not necessarily an addiction. It's not necessarily a disorder. That could simply be an obsession, could it perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the crucial issue is what is the negative consequences on other parts of someone's life. So I think an interesting question for us to throw about today would be, what is an enthusiastic user versus what is an addict? And I would argue the addict is someone who is experiencing negative consequences on other parts of their life. And there's some situations in their life that are resembling the substance misuse treatment model.
So you believe it could make them ill?
Well, if you follow the substance abuse treatment model, there's loss of control, there's increased preoccupation, there's increased obsession, and there's the negative consequences in other parts of your life.
But when it comes to an addiction, help me with this one. When it comes to drugs, an awful lot of people turn to crime because they need to raise money, and therefore they go down a very different path. Is there any sense that people are sacrificing their lives for something that is, to them, perhaps just a pleasure, such as video gaming?
Absolutely. I mean, we have had a number of clients come through our door where they have sacrificed areas of their life, including relationship. Including one example, and I have to be careful here not to break any confidentiality.
Get it, I understand, yeah.
Where someone lost access to their children because they were so preoccupied with gaming. So, and we're talking about relatively chronic cases here. People don't walk into a treatment centre because it's a bit of a problem. It's become really something that's having a really negative impact on their life.
Okay, we'll come back to you, if I may, in just a moment to ask about whether you think that is accelerating or not. But Tom, you reckon it's been the making of you, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. The finding a gaming community that I was able to be a part of has kind of pushed me from being an incredibly socially awkward teenager who really didn't have many social skills to speak of into being who I am today, which is a vast improvement. And I'm able to sit here and talk with you guys now. I wouldn't have been able to do that without this. Having a gaming community which I was able to be a part of has provided me with that.
Yeah,
and I can't really refute that.
So tell me how it helped you, because video gaming is to some extent, I imagine, slightly isolated. It's you sitting there. You're not necessarily talking to people. What sort of confidence did it give you?
It gives you an area where it gives you a common ground with people, because while you say it's a fairly isolated hobby, I don't feel that is actually the case for the most part. You may do something on your own in the same way how if you were a football player you would practice control of the ball on your own, things like that. But at the end of the day, humans are pretty social creatures, and if you are enjoying something, you are for the most part going to try and find people to talk to about it. You're going to want to find someone that you can discuss. You know, oh, I enjoyed this part of the game, particularly. You know, how a good amount. Or I'm really struggling with this bit. Does anyone know how I can
Does it
get
matter
around
that it's not reality?
I don't feel that that is a huge issue. I feel like that is a hang-up that a lot of people have with gaming, the not reality part of it. You can't fake interaction. I don't feel. If like anyone who plays the games, they'll be able to tell if if you're actually talking to a real person or if it's just a game.
There's that old expression, isn't there? If you can fake sincerity, you can fake anything. How many hours a day do you play?
At this point in time, I'm a grown man. I don't get to play very often. I play a couple of hours a day at most. Because I'm busy running events or working.
You see, Peter, as far as I understand it, you think it could be just as dangerous to spend a long time reading a book.
You know, instead of just talking about case histories, let's look at the systematic studies. So there was a study that was reported about a year and a half ago, done by researchers at Columbia University. This was a survey of many, many children across the world, aged 6 to 11. And they looked at for correlations between amount of time spent playing video games and other aspects of their life. And what they reported from that study is that the more these kids played video games, the more social they were, as rated by teachers and parents. The more they played video games, the better they did in school. The more they played video games, the higher was their IQ and their ranking of intellectual achievement.
And this is sort of what Tom's saying as well about his own life.
So when you look systematically, there are many other studies. There was a report in the American Journal of Play by 3 video game researchers in which they reviewed dozens of studies which showed cognitive benefits of video games. No surprise. I mean, these are very cognitively challenging
And why
games.
do you think that happens?
It happens because these challenge your mental abilities more than almost anything else you can do. So what they've reported, they found better memory, they found better executive processing abilities and so on in video game players compared to non-video game players. They found higher IQs in video game players compared to non-video game players. And then they did experiments. Is this correlation? Is it just that smarter people play video games, or does playing video games in some way improve your cognitive abilities? So there have been many experiments done now where you take non-video game players, for the sake of the experiment, they play one or another video game, a certain number of hours a week for a certain number of weeks, and lo and behold, their cognitive ability improves.
I'll come back in a little while and ask you the book question again, because I see you've got a number of publications behind you, so you obviously like to dive into books. But you two, health professionals here, do you recognize the picture, first of all, that Peter's painting there? You have to be bright, it makes you brighter.
Yes, but that doesn't mean there's going to be some people, just like with technology in general, smartphone addiction, food, some people, drugs and alcohol, some people will be able to be moderate and some will have a problem. And I think it's the problematized, the people we see are the people that have developed the problem. Now, is that because of the gaming, or is it because of a position
they have
of
an addictive
stress,
personality.
anxiety, or addictive?
Yeah.
Well, it's very difficult to. There's no evidence that I've found to say that there's an addiction gene. What we can say is that some were maybe predisposed to addiction, and then there's developmental issues. So I don't think we can say it is the technology, the gaming itself, because as Peter has said, there'll be people who, because if people have done X, Y, and Z because of the gaming, they'll have done it without the gaming.
So what would you say to a parent who thinks Johnny or Sarah is spending far too much time doing something like this? Would you say, look, you're right to be worried about it, or would you say, well, look, just take a look at what they're doing in terms of their relationships, in terms of their stress levels, etc., individual by individual basis?
Yeah, I mean, and it has to be done on an individual basis, and that's why I think it's helpful that the awareness has now been brought into the public domain. My suggestion will be, and I don't want to kind of suggest all parents do this, but you know, if your child is having problems and you say, look, and you try to moderate and say it's only 3 hours during the week and perhaps 4 hours at the weekend or something of that description. If the child is showing problems, being able to moderate their game use, then it may indicate that there is something else psychologically going on for them. So are they becoming irritable? Are they becoming preoccupied with gaming when they're not actually playing the game itself? Are they unable to concentrate on other activities if they're not playing the game itself as well? So there are things to look out for. But I don't want to overstate in terms of the problem within the gaming community. We are talking about a small percentage of people that kind of develop this problem.
Did you see this, Tom?
Yeah, if I would like to just bring it back to the whole telling parents. There's a quite well-known American celebrity, Terry Crews. He's been quite vocal about getting involved in his son's hobby of computer gaming, and there's a video out there of him saying how he didn't understand why his son was not only playing, and sort of watching other people play games, and he said that he felt like he was losing his son, so he got involved himself. I feel like following that kind of attitude towards it, if they don't understand what it's about, which is understandable because it's a relatively new medium, getting involved, or at least taking the effort to look into it, would be massively beneficial for both the parents, you know, their state of mind regarding it, and both.
Okay, I get that. It creates a bond. Don't necessarily reject it just because you don't like it.
Exactly.
But have you seen problems within the gaming community yourself?
Problems in which regard?
Well, with regard to obsession, with regard to people perhaps abandoning certain areas of their life, not paying attention to what they're doing, having relationship difficulties, etc., etc., etc. Perhaps the opposite of what you had.
I haven't seen any huge deals like that. Typically, people who are going to be struggling in those sort of areas are not going to be the sort of people I'll see at events I'll run. Anyone who's particularly obsessive will probably isolate themselves from.
So they might be doing this at home rather than coming to a big event.
Yes, they would probably not be. They would probably be foregoing a lot of the social aspect, because if they are truly addicted to the gaming itself, just the gaming, then they are going to forego the social side of it to do more gaming.
Well, you'll tell me about the social side in just a moment. Peter, it's a big deal in the United States, and there are certain people who make a lot of money out of this. By talking about it in such a positive light, do you have any problem with encouraging people to go down a path that at the moment we don't necessarily know so much about?
You know, I think actually there have been people playing video games long enough that we actually know quite a lot about it. And the research suggests that overall, playing video games has positive effects, more positive effects than negative effects. I think what we have, I don't want to dismiss the idea that there are a certain number of people, the estimates vary from 0.5, you know, half of 1% on to somewhat higher, who play video games a great deal and who for whom it's problematic, and who would admit that they're spending more time playing video games than they want to do, and that it's having negative effects on their life. Now, there was one study of such people conducted out of the University of Rochester here in the United States that really raised the question of what's cause and effect. Are they playing video games because they're having psychological problems? And this is the only way that they can socialize, that they can get any kind of pleasure, because other things in their life are for one reason or another missing. Or is it the other way around? And this study concluded, based on clinical kinds of interviews and study, that it was more the case that they were playing enormous amounts of time on video games because other aspects of their life were not working out. So one thing that I would suggest is, if you have a child or a friend who is playing excessive video games and who is unhappy, like video games are not satisfying what their needs in life, I would not necessarily say that the immediate solution is to deprive them of video game play, but the immediate solution would be to talk about what else is tell me about the rest of your life. You know, are you being bullied in school? Do you have friends?
Do you two want to jump in and have a conversation with Peter, because you've got areas of interest that cross over? Yeah, by all means do.
Well, I would say, Peter, I mean, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet there. I mean, if I would see it exactly as you just said, it's almost the treatment model should be a self-medicating treatment model, that people who develop a problem with gaming might be developing that problems, or they have a problem by gaming because there's other conditions. So exactly the point. It's not necessarily the gaming, or at least the evidence is not there to suggest that it's the gaming per se that's causing the problem.
Matt?
I would agree to that. Agree with that. Although the excessive gaming can exacerbate those problems, if it's social anxiety.
But do you think it's something we really need to keep an eye on, with the World Health Organization saying, you know, there could be a disorder here, or there is a disorder here, recognizable as such? Do you think it's something that we need to sort of explore, because it's so prevalent these days?
Yeah, and I think even if we're playing around with percentages, if it's half of 1%, or I've even seen figures saying up to 8%. It's actually, if you look at the total number of people around the world that are gaming, it's actually a lot of people, even if you take that lower percentage. Just coming back to your point, though, one of the problems I see with addiction is that, in any kind of addiction, is that if a person is in an addictive process, they'll try and protect that addiction as much as possible, as opposed to looking at the other problems. And so that can become a problem in itself. So they may say that it's not, the gaming is not causing a problem, everything's fine. It's you that's the problem, or it's my friends that are the problem. So sometimes it's not as easy to unwrap that from someone that's in an addiction itself.
So that's bad saying that there are millions and millions of people worldwide doing this. You make a small living, I think, out of organising events. All right, so maybe the tax man doesn't know about that. Why is it suddenly so popular? Why is it so big?
I mean, I feel the reason video gaming as a whole has become such a huge part of culture in the past couple of decades is the advent of playing online. It's been only 10 years or so since it's really kicked off. But playing online with people is fulfilling the social part of things, which they wouldn't have been able to get beforehand, at least not so directly. I feel like being able to connect with people from anywhere. I have friends everywhere in the world. I have friends in Saudi Arabia that I never met in real life.
How do you know they're friends then?
Because I interact with them, and I don't have to see them in person to be friends with them.
It's a funny old world to me.
Yeah.
I think that way.
I mean, to spin it on the other end, I see my boss at work every day. They are not my friend.
Okay, so more investigation. The jury's out at the moment. What do you think?
We do need more evidence to say that it is in of itself a disorder. Because if you're going to say gaming is a disorder, what about all the other behavioural addictions that are not considered a disorder?
Yeah. So, Peter, we've got to wrap it up in just a minute, so I want to get back to Peter in there. Tom's saying that he has friends he's never met. Would it not be better, perhaps, to hang a sign on your door saying, "Gone fishing," and go out and do something in which you meet real people?
To me, it's better. I grew up fishing, right? I didn't grow up playing games, right? But I have to look, I can't say that just because what I grew up with, that's the best in this world today. You know, we are living, for better or worse, and I think all in all better, in a technological world. Kids play at whatever is the newest technology. When I was a kid, we were still back in the automobile age. Kids were taking cars apart and putting them together, sometimes obsessively so, right? To the loss of some of their other things that they were doing. I was fishing all the time. So now there's kids who play a lot of video games, and we older people look at it, and it just looks sick to some of us, right? So I have to ask the question, well, really, what's going on? And the only way I can answer that question is by looking actually at the real research that's done. And as I'm saying, the research shows positive effects.
Thank you.
What I'm concerned about, I think I'm not all that concerned with whether this gets labeled as an addiction or not for some small number of people. What I'm concerned about is the public press, the negative stigma of video games. I have a colleague, actually not a colleague, but a friend who is a psychiatrist who treats video game players who come to his office. And he says that more of them are suffering from the stigma that society puts on gaming than anything else. They come in saying, I'm a lazy good for nothing because I play video games all the time. And so he will then talk to them about their game, and they'll talk about the game, all the levels they've reached, what they've had to do that, and then he'll say to them, you're not lazy. That's hard work to achieve that level. You're playing a difficult game. If you were playing chess, people wouldn't be calling you, lazy good for nothing for doing that. So that's his first step.
Peter?
And then they can talk about whether they can reach it.
I have to stop it. I'm sure this conversation could continue for a very long time. Thank you all. Thank you all very much indeed. And I think the message there from Peter Gray in the United States and from those around the table who've joined us for this edition of Roundtable is don't diss what you don't know. Give it a go, keep an eye on it. If it becomes a problem, you can deal with it. But so many other things are problems as well, and they're not known as addictions. You've been watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. Hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.